Welcome back. This video is going to add additional structure onto the overshoot and collapse model that we built previously. And the idea here is that overshoot and collapse can also occur when you have a renewable resource. The previous structure is a non-renewable resource. So we're going to add structure on and we're going to see if we can get the same behavior. It's a basic idea here. So thanks, and let's start. Hello folks, this is the model that was built previously, and it's of overshoot and collapse with these three feedback loops. The deer forage resources can only be depleted in this case, so we want to add structure on to make this renewable. And one of the things that's sort of missing is this idea that there's no first order control, a link from the deer forage resources to the food consumed. So what I am going to do is add structure in, but before I do that, I want to add a graph that is going to show me my deer forage along with the number of deer. So I'll click this. I've clicked on the graph. I've opened this up. I'm going to double click and go into graph, and I'm going to want it to, I want deer to be in here. And I'm going to put forage, and I'm going to put forage on the right axis. So I'm going to do the plus, and I want the deer forage resources. I'll click OK, but the scales are very different with these two. So I'm going to place my deer forage in the right axis. And we can see that they're both heading towards 0. Without the first order control, there are situations where my deer forage resources could have gone negative. They're not doing it here. I want to clean this up just a little bit. I'm going to click on the wrench. I'm going to go to my X labels and increase that just so I have an even number. And I want to label this, and this is going to be deer and deer forage resources. And hit a return, and now I have a variable name for this, or a graph name, excuse me. And now I want to add structure onto this. I'll slide this down a little bit. And so the first thing I need to do is I need to have a maximum. I want to control this and I want to shut it down. I'm going to shut it down with a nonlinear function. So I'm going to add in, this is going to be the maximum forage resources. And what you can imagine is that there's a limit. There's an area, and that there's a limit to how much food or forage resources are available for deer and probably all animals. I'm going to click and hit return. So I'm going to peek in here, and just to set this up, this is 200e to the 6. I'm going to make this 200e to the 6 also. And the units here have to be the same as the deer forage, and it's going to be in pounds. And now I'm going to go up and click on another converter variable and bring it down, and this is going to be the ratio of deer forage resources to maximum. And I'm going to click on my arrow, and I'm going to connect the stock of deer forage resources. I'll click on it again, and it's going to be the maximum forage resources are going to go into there. And it's going to be the deer forage resources divided by the maximum, and this should be dimensionless. And it's because it's pounds divided by pounds. And the idea here is if I just simulate this now, this is a good modeling practice. You add one variable, and if it's a running model, let's simulate it. It should be the exact same behavior. It is. And I'm going to click on the ratio and right-click and go to View Results. And this is just showing me it's starting out at 1 and it's approaching 0. And the argument is as this approaches 0, the deer consumed should start approaching 0, that it's impossible for deer to eat no matter how hungry they are or how much food they need to continue to eat if there is no deer forage resources available. this would have to go to 0. So I'm going to click on my converter, and I'm going to call this an effect. Effect of the, let's call it forage ratio on consumption. Just pull this back a little bit. I like making these so I can follow the feedback loop, making them curved. And I'm going to double click on this. It's going to be equal to the ratio, and this is new. I'm going to go down to this graphical function here and click on this, and this is sort of behind the scenes, and I'm going to click on graphical, and I know this can never be greater than 1. So this 1 to 2, I'll make this from 0 to 1. And what I'm going to do is this effect is going to connect to the food consumed, and it's going to be a multiplier. So if I'm multiplying by 1, the food consumed will be what it would have been prior. And if it's less than 1, less food is going to get consumed is the idea. And as this approaches 0, imagine if this is going down, the deer forage resources are declining. They are, the red dotted line here, going towards 0, that you're running out of food. And as you run out of food, there would be less consumed, but it's not going to happen until you get very close to 0 is what it is. It's going to be more difficult for the deer to find food. So I'm going to go up and make my y-axis also equal to 1. And if I go down here, I know it has to have sort of this positive slope, and that it's got to be very sharp. And so this is telling a story that if I'm at 50%, the deer is still eating everything they want is what it is. And then maybe as they get down to, I only have 10% of the food left, that they will not be eating 100%. They'll only be eating about 60% of what they'd like, sort of an indication of starvation. So I'm just going to put this in there. And I'm going to double click. And it's going to be multiplied by, so times the effect. And it says one invalid equation, 1 unit to define. Oh, I did not define the effect of forage. And I've looked down here on the right-hand side. It says 1 unit to define. And this is going to be dimensionless. The thing coming into it is dimensionless, so this mostly is going to be dimensionless. And there I go. Now, there's going to be numerical changes, but I'm expecting to see the same patterns of behavior when I simulate this. So let me simulate this now. I'm still getting the overshoot and decline. I didn't remember what it was before. So let me I'm going to click on my deer. I'm going to right click and say view results. It's going to save the previous runs. 4 and 5 are very similar. Oh, let's see. Yeah. 3, 4, and 5 are very similar. So not much of a numerical change. Everything is still happening as it did before, but I've closed one more feedback loop. Here's what's happened, and this is going to be a balancing feedback loop. There's one minus sign in it. The blue is indicating that it's minus, and it is kicking in. So I'll go over and label this. Let's see, I'm going to open this up in the bottom right, click on my flashlight, there it is, and click OK, and just drop the label in there. So I clicked on this loop label indicator over here in the far right for this structure, and I've just dropped it in. So now I've got 4 feedback loops, 3 balancing, 1 reinforcing. I have not made this. This is a first order control so that my deer forage resources can never go negative. I want to add a growth in here. So there's going to be an inflow, and this is going to be forage growth, I'm going to call it. You can name these things anything you want is what it is, right? So it's got to make sense to you if you're telling a story to a client or to other folks. I need another variable in here, and there's got to be a baseline growth rate for forage. Bit of a long variable name, but that's okay. I want it to make sense. I'm going to go up to my connector, and I can connect that to forage growth. I'm holding the Option key down. I'm using a Mac, and it will take or select the last icon that I've used. So I'll drag that over, and I've got a few things to fix. So the forage growth is simply going to be the deer time, or the deer forage resources times that baseline growth rate. It's going to be pounds per year. That makes sense. And this is going to be a fraction. And I don't know how quickly it would grow. I'm just going to guess. I'm making a wild guess right now and going 0.1. This could be something you'd look up, and I'm betting it's a nonlinear function somehow that's coming off that ratio of deer foraged to what's left. How much land do you have left that's barren that is eligible for seeds to land on it in order to grow? It would be something like that. But this baseline growth rate for normal conditions, it's got to be dimensionless. It's a fraction. You could write fraction in there, but it's dimensionless per year. And now I will close this. 1 unit undefined. Let's see. Oh, no, just disappeared. I am good to go. So now I'm not 100% sure if this will work. That's okay. That's why we simulate and we experiment with these things. But I'm anticipating that I should be capable of getting the same behavior. Numerically, there will be differences. I've added an additional reinforcing feedback loop, and what I'm going to anticipate is that the feedback loop I have just added is not going to be powerful enough to overwhelm the growth in deer. So let's simulate and see. So it's overshooting and collapsing. It's going off the charts here, and the reason is I'm growing more and more food, so I'm changing the carrying capacity. So let me just double click and go in, and it's going up. I'll make this 50,000. So I've just allowed the axis to vary. And I am overshooting and collapsing. And this is the initial carrying capacity is actually changing now because I'm growing more food. And it's really because of what I've set this maximum at. So if I click on my forage, it should never... Oh, it can go above the 2 million is what it is based on that growth rate. So it's going up to 300 million. So if it really needs to be limited, I need to add something from my ratio of desire to forage. I'm still getting the same behavior as the argument. Numerical differences. I'm still having a peak and then a decline in the net burst. I'm having a peak and a decline in the number of deer. So I'm going to add one more nonlinearity in here, and this is going to be the effect of the forage ratio on growth. I'm going to this ratio. This ratio will connect to it. I'm going to double click. I'm going to go in, it's going to be equal to the ratio. This should be dimensionless because the ratio is dimensionless. I'm going to go to my graphical, which is the second icon here, graphical function. Click on graphical. And this should never be greater than 1. So on my x-axis, I'll make that 1. I'll make this 1. And what we need to be thinking about now is the slope. And if this is 0, then there's plenty of room for things to grow. So my growth rate could be 1, which I'd multiply by the baseline growth rate. I could even make it grow greater than 1, right? Maybe it's growing at twice the rate because there's so much land available in order to grow things. So this would depend on the science behind how this stuff grows. I'm going to keep it simple for now. I'm going to leave it at 1. And I know that as it approaches 1, it means all the land is occupied and there's no room for further growth. So it has to go to 0. So it's going to have a negative slope. I'm going to pick on this one here. And I'm just going to crank this all the way to the right. So it's going to be very flat. And then it's going to steeply decline. The growth rate is going to decrease as I am approaching 1. I'm going to click on my connector. And I'm going to connect this to my forage growth. Double click, and it's going to be multiplied. So what should happen is it should change this. I should not shoot up above the carrying capacity as much as what it is. So let's simulate this and see what's going on. And now, so I still have the overshoot and collapse. It's not as severe. And you can see it in these graphs, and the reason it's not as severe is because the forage is allowed to continually grow. So even though the deer are shooting up beyond the capacity and are consuming the forage at a really an unsustainable rate, the forage is declining, but not as quickly because it can regenerate. So I'm just going to double click, and we're running this out for 25 years. Let me run it out for 50 years. That's a great thing about simulation. You can change these things and see what happens. And I'm going to simulate, and I am reaching some type of steady state at a much lower deer population than before. I'm still getting the overshoot and collapse. I have added one more feedback loop, 2 feedback loops on the system. So let's go in and just plunk those in. So let me hit the flashlight. I've got that one already. The strengths are changing in these feedback loops. They're moving around. There we go. That's the new one. I'll click on this icon and drop it in there. It's funny, it says R1 and R1, and I think that's because of the strength. And we'll fix that in just a second. And then I have this balancing feedback loop. You can see this negative. There's one negative in this feedback loop, so it's going to be another balancing feedback loop. I think I have my B3 one with 4 variables. We can click on the flash. There it is. I'll click on the icon. And I don't like having these B3s twice is what it is. So I'll double click on the white. I'll click on this. And I'm going to right click. And I'm going to edit name. And I'm just going to call this B4. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. Right click on the R11 and click on edit name. And what I'll do is call this R2. And now simulate. Nothing's really changed. It's going to be the same. And now if I go down and look at the feedback loops, they have the new names and they are all unique. And that's it. That's all I want to show you here. And I'll have other videos that'll explain these nonlinear functions in a little more detail. Thanks, and have a good one.